In this installment of the Dude Perspective, we will be looking at the second of three classic dystopian-style novels, Animal Farm by George Orwell. In this Dude Perspective series, we are responding to the renewed interest and increasingly frequent references people seem to be making to these works of fiction in modern public discourse, also known as typing in all caps to strangers on the internet. So let's take a look at the classic story Animal Farm. I remember reading Animal Farm in high school. I remember thinking it sounded a little nutty, and it struck me how sad it was. Of the cast of characters, I remembered Squealer with the greatest clarity. There is something about the way that Orwell described his ability to persuade people not only with his words, but also with his movements. I am not sure if this intrigued me or just creeped me out. Heck, I still don't know which one it is. In this novel, we are told the fanciful story of what happens when a farmer starts neglecting his farm and the animals that live there, his means of production, as it were. This novella is an allegory of communism and has much to say about revolution, motivation, greed, and power. Like I mentioned, I had read this book in high school, and as with any task that I had to do, it was a chore, despite being a short read. Upon reading it as an older and hopefully wiser adult, I found the cast of characters particularly compelling. In this work, Orwell is able to use farm animals to capture the essence of various societal factions that have to make sense of societal revolutions that manifest in their times. Unfortunately, some fare better than others, and as one would expect, there are those who will rationalize the results despite their intentions. Or because of their intentions. I forgot which one. This book is packed with quotables, but the one that stands out is the pig statement that whereas all animals are created equal, some are more equal than others. In Animal Farm, you will see what happens when language is weaponized and is wielded as a blunt force object rather than a tool to persuade, which is awesome because here in the U.S. we have an abiding love of freedom of speech, and patriotic Americans would never let the public discourse get hijacked like that. For any of you about to read or reread this book, I am warning you, it does not end well. Orwell does a masterful job at pacing. Reading this book is like being in a boxing match in which your opponent gets stronger and crueler as the fight goes on. By chapters 9 and 10, you are enduring injustice after injustice with increasing rapidity, culminating in cruelty and ironies only truly appreciated by the oldest animals amongst us. And spoiler alert, this is where you turn off the video if you don't want to know what happens in the book. For the rest of you brave souls, let's take a trip to the country. The book opens with the farmer, Mr. Jones, latching up his hen house for the night on Manor Farm. He retires to the farmhouse, and when the light goes out, the barnyard comes alive. The prize middle white boar, Old Major, has a message for everyone. This was important because Old Major was kind of a big deal.
I'm very important. I have many leather-bound books, and my apartment smells of rich mahogany.
The animals all gather in the barn, and our cast of characters are introduced. We have hens, pigeons, ducks, and Moses, who is a tame raven, 3 dogs, Bluebell, Jessie, Pincher, and an unnamed female cat, pigs, sheep, and cows, a white goat, Muriel, 3 horses, Boxer, Clover, and Molly, the pretty white mare, and finally the donkey, Benjamin. Benjamin was the oldest animal on the farm, and we will notice that he has a peculiar reaction to the events that are about to unfold. When asked about his lack of reaction or lack of enthusiasm for the events unfolding on Manor Farm, Benjamin's answer was always the same: donkeys live a long time. Major's message was the great news that he had it all figured out. The farm is plenty big enough and abundant enough to support every creature on it, and it was man that caused all their problems. If the animals could remove man from the farm, they would be better off. Man steals what the farm produces because he produces nothing himself, and so man is the enemy. All animals, including rats and rabbits, are comrades, and Major calls the animals to look to the coming revolution with anticipation, but stops short of instigating or predicting when it might happen. Major then relates his dream by first saying that he can't describe the dream, and then immediately describes it as a dream of the earth, as it will be when man has vanished. In the dream, Major recalls a long-forgotten song that he had been taught as a young pig. It was called Beasts of England, and it sung to the tune of a combination of Clementine and La Cucaracha. The song is a call to arms to overthrow man and imagine a world of animals. As Major sings it, the animals throw up the horns in appreciation of the wonderful tune. Apparently, Major was quite the crooner. The barn meeting ends when Farmer Jones is awakened by the racket of the Beasts of England. Major dies 3 days later, and the pigs, being seen as the smartest animals, take it upon themselves to begin preparing their fellow animals for the coming revolution. The pigs are dominated by two leaders, Snowball and Napoleon. Snowball seems to represent the progressive element, and Napoleon the conservative element. Another pig named Squealer quickly assumes the role of propagandist. These three formulate Major's teachings into a school of thought called animalism. The pigs had trouble getting the animals to learn animalism. Each animal had their own reservations or intellectual shortcomings. Some animals felt a duty of loyalty to Farmer Jones, and others wondered why they should care about what might happen after they die. Molly, the vain mare, was said to ask the stupidest questions, worrying about things like access to ribbons for her mane and sugar cubes. The pigs persisted and muddled along, finding the most resolute ally in the big cart horse Boxer, who adopted a single answer to every problem posed: "I will work harder." Moses the raven was a thorn in the side of the pigs. Moses was Jones's pet and persisted in spreading lies about a mysterious place called Sugar Candy Mountain.
Yeah, Charlie, Candy Mountain. It's a land of sweets and joy and joyness.
Please stop bouncing on me.
Candy Mountain, Charlie. Yeah, Candy Mountain.
All right, fine. I'll go with you to Candy Mountain.
La 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 la.
To which all animals go upon their death. Major's heralded revolution came sooner than expected. Jones had been a capable farmer and was said to be a hard taskmaster. However, he had fallen on hard times and began neglecting his farm. On Midsummer's Eve, Jones goes into Willingdon, a nearby town, and gets hammered and does not come home at night. The farmhands fail to feed the animals, and when Jones finally makes it back to the farm, passes out in the house without tending the animals have had enough. The cows break into the store sheds and the animals begin helping themselves. Jones and the farmhand grab whips and begin trying to get the animals back in line. They fail and are driven from the farm. Mrs. Jones sees what's going on and sneaks out as well. And just like that, Manor Farm becomes Animal Farm. The animals build a fire and throw all the reins, bridles, and other implements of oppression onto it. The animals conclude the celebration with extra rations and singing Beasts of England through 7 full times. The next morning, an inspection of the farm is conducted. The animals unanimously decide to turn the farmhouse into a museum and declare that no animals should ever live there. Hams found hanging in the kitchen are given a proper burial. The pigs then tell the animals that in the past 3 months they have taught themselves to read and write. They further explain that they have reduced animalism into a list of 7 commandments. Number 1, the Lord loves a working man. Number 2, don't trust Whitey. Number 3, see a doctor and get rid of it. No, wait. That's something else. The 7 commandments are rendered faithfully here as they were painted on the side of the barn of Animal Farm. Number 1, whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Number 2, what goes on 4 legs or has wings is a friend. Number 3, no animal shall wear clothes. Number 4, no animal shall sleep in a bed. Number 5, no animal shall drink alcohol. Number 6, no animal shall kill any other animal. Number 7, all animals are equal. Snowball calls the animals to the fields, but before it happens, the cows demand to be milked. The pigs manage this task, and it results in 5 pails of milk. The pigs send the animals to the fields to bring in the hay in record time, and by the time the exhausted animals are through for the day, the milk has mysteriously disappeared. The animals undertake the work on Animal Farm with varying degrees of intensity. Boxer and Clover are examples of virtue in this respect. The pigs supervise and stick to brain work. Molly slacks off. The cat disappears for hours on end and only shows up at dinner time. Benjamin works the same way and at the same pace he has always worked. Never shirking, but never signing up for extra hours. When asked if he was happier now than when under Farmer Jones, Benjamin would remind the animals that donkeys live a long time. Sundays were a day of no work. A ceremony was established that included a homemade flag made from a green tablecloth and emblazoned with a white horn and hoof, the symbols of the coming Republic of the Animals. Next week's work was planned and resolutions were made which always resulted in disputes between Snowball and Napoleon. Beasts of England was sung and the rest of the day was given to leisure. Times were good on Animal Farm. The pigs set up shop in the harness room, and Snowball busied himself with setting up animal committees. The pigs undertook an effort to teach the animals to read and write. By autumn, the farm was experiencing a degree of success in regards to spreading literacy. Times were good on Animal Farm. The pigs found it necessary to reduce the 7 commandments to one maxim: 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. The sheep took to bleating this for hours on end and seemed to never tire of it. Naturally, Napoleon could not be bothered to care about Snowball's committees. Napoleon had undertaken the education of 9 puppies that had been born in June and whom he had promptly taken away from the mothers. Napoleon kept these pups in a loft and they were soon forgotten. By late summer, Napoleon and Snowball were sending pigeons to the neighboring farms to spread the news of the revolution and teach their comrades, beasts of England. Former Farmer Jones had taken to hanging out at the Red Lion in Willingdon and complaining about his rebellious animals. Nobody argued with him, nobody offered much help, and most just plotted how to turn Jones's misfortune into their own good fortune. Animal Farm was neighbor to Foxwood Farm, which was owned by Mr. Pilkington, an easygoing gentleman farmer. On the other side, Animal Farm shared a boundary with Pinchfield Farm, owned by Mr. Frederick, a tough and shrewd man. None of these folks got along with one another, and that likely worked in Animal Farm's favor. The early proclamations of a swift demise of Animal Farm eventually gave way to accusations of wickedness and cannibalism. However, the farmers noticed a sudden rebellious streak in their own animals, and before long were noticing Beasts of England being sung on their own farms. In October, while the early apples were ripening and ready to harvest, the mystery of the disappearing milk was solved. It was being fed to the pigs. By the pigs. The pigs also demanded that the apples be theirs as well. Squealer explained that science proved that milk was crucial for brain work and that without these nutrients, Farmer Jones would return. The animals did not want that because times were good on Animal Farm. Without Jones. On October 12th, former Farmer Jones and some men attempt to retake Manor Farm with about 9 men, 3 of his own and about 6 from Pinchfield and Foxwood. Unfortunately for Jones, Snowball had read a book on Julius Caesar's military tactics, and the animals were ready for them. The animals successfully defended Animal Farm. One sheep is killed. Snowball takes a grazing bullet wound from Jones, but fights through the wound, landing a blow on Jones himself, flinging him into a pile of dung. Boxer brains a stable boy from Foxwood, who recovers and escapes. All the animals participate, even the cat, except for Molly, who chickens out. Snowball and Boxer received the Animal Hero First Class Award. The dead sheep received Animal Hero Second Class, posthumously. An impromptu celebration ensues. Times are good on Animal Farm. Molly defects in December. The pigeons spot her after her disappearance on the other side of Willingdon, pulling a dog cart and bedazzled with ribbons, as was her style. Animal Farm quickly forgets Molly. As the winter enters January, the ground is hard enough that there isn't much else to do but to hold meetings and plan work. Snowball and Napoleon, as usual, disagree at every point. Snowball decides that a windmill would be an excellent addition to the farm and begins drawing up plans. Napoleon argued that the greatest need was increased food production. Animal Farm becomes deeply divided on the issue of whether the windmill was a good idea, the only animal not taking a side being Benjamin. Benjamin doesn't believe either Napoleon or Snowball and assumes life will go on as it always had. Badly. Things eventually come to a head at a meeting to argue whether Snowball's windmill would be built. Snowball argues passionately. Napoleon barely offers a counter-argument. Before an official vote can be taken, Napoleon reveals his secret police. The 9 pups he was raising were now brass-studded, collar-wearing hounds, who unceremoniously chased Snowball from Animal Farm. Dissenting voices were first drowned out by the bleating sheep, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and then silenced by Napoleon's hounds. Napoleon abolishes Sunday meetings and brings an end to debate on matters of policy and farm management. Squealer makes the rounds and reminds the animals that Snowball was a degenerate criminal. The animals that recall Snowball's behavior that won him Animal Hero First Class Award are told that loyalty and obedience are more important than bravery. Boxer is greatly troubled, as he was the other Animal Hero First Class bearer. Boxer decides that his lying eyes cannot be trusted. Boxer decides that if Napoleon says it is true, that it must be true, and adopts a sister catchphrase to go along with "I will work harder." Napoleon is always right. The weather breaks, and by spring it is decided that the windmill will be built after all. No explanation is offered. However, the animals are told that it will require dedication and sacrifice. Rations might be reduced. The effort is expected to take 2 years. Squealer was dispatched to explain to the animals that the windmill was always actually Napoleon's idea that Snowball had tried to steal. The dogs that accompanied Squealer growled menacingly in agreement. Times were changing on Animal Farm. The animals worked like slaves through spring and summer. However, it was the first animal-sourced harvest, and problems were encountered. As the summer wore on, it became obvious that they would be facing a hard winter. The windmill presented problems of its own, particularly how best to break up the abundant limestone into blocks that could be used to build with. It took until late summer for enough stone to be gathered for construction to begin. The animals consoled themselves with the rationalization that where times were hard, they were no worse off than under the harsh taskmaster of Jones. However, it was also true that shortages of various items were beginning to manifest, and none of the animals knew how or where to procure those supplies. This was particularly true of the machinery that the windmill would require. Napoleon had an answer. He decides that Animal Farm would trade with neighboring farms to procure needed supplies. This would be accomplished through a human intermediary, Mr. Whymper, a sly-looking little man. Naturally, this bothered the animals because many remembered that it was a little over a year ago that the farm had resolved to never have any dealings with humans, or at least they thought they did. Napoleon's hounds quieted protests, and the sheep broke into a round of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Squealer was dispatched to smooth things over. Squealer asked the animals for documentation of such resolutions between animals and humans, but the animals had no documentation that the resolutions ever existed. The humans came to regard Animal Farm with grudging respect. Former Farmer Jones moved away to another part of the country, and it was at this time that rumors would circulate that Animal Farm was considering a partnership, first with Foxwood and then later with Pinchfield. The goalposts continue migrating at this time as the pigs move into the farmhouse, taking meals in the kitchen, spending leisure time in the drawing room, and even sleeping in the beds. And Napoleon takes the title leader. The move to the farmhouse again troubles the animals, as they recall declaring the farmhouse to be a museum. And many could swear they recall the 4th commandment being that no animal shall sleep in a bed. Clover fetches the clever mule Muriel, and they go to the barn where the 7 commandments are painted on the wall. Clover asks Muriel to read the 4th commandment. It reads, "No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets." All is well on Animal Farm, where it was further decided that the pigs would start getting up an hour later than the rest of the animals. By autumn, the stores were low, but the half-finished windmill compensated for everything. A wet spell in November halts progress on the windmill, and then a violent storm hits. The windmill is left a heap of ruins, leveled to its foundations. To the disappointment of modern wokists, Napoleon forgoes blaming the collapse of the windmill on climate change, and instead blames it on Snowball. Napoleon declares that they will rebuild the windmill. To put a finer point on it, the Animal Farm will build back better. It is a bitter winter. In January, food falls short and the corn rations were drastically reduced. Relief was planned via an extra potato ration, but the potatoes had spoiled. The animals were starving, but the pigs were careful to maintain the narrative of a thriving animal farm to the outside world. Napoleon begins using Mr. Whymper to gaslight the citizens of Willingdon. Napoleon also enters a contract with Mr. Whymper to sell the hens' eggs to procure enough grain to feed Animal Farm. The hens do not respond well, and a revolt ignites, led by 3 young black Minorcan pullets. Napoleon withdrew the hens' rations. The hens held out 5 days, but eventually caved. 9 hens died, and their deaths were attributed to coccidiosis. Don't act like you don't know what coccidiosis means. A hard frost descends that does not break until February. The cold and hungry animals struggle to build the new windmill, which requires thicker walls, which requires more stone, which requires more work. Napoleon is rarely seen outside the farmhouse, and when he is seen, he is surrounded by a secret police. While nobody actually sees Snowball, suddenly rumors abound as to how Snowball is wreaking havoc on Animal Farm by sneaking around at night, probably in a red baseball cap, breaking eggs, knocking over milk pails, stealing corn, inciting insurrections via his social media channels. If anything goes wrong on Animal Farm, it was Snowball's doing. Napoleon conducts a commission and finds olfactory evidence of Snowball's presence all over the farm. It is discovered that not only has Snowball sold himself to Pilkington and is helping plot the takeover of Animal Farm, but that Snowball has been in league with Jones from the beginning and even tried to sabotage the victory at the Battle of Cowshed. The animals were stupefied at this news. Even Boxer protested, but Squealer explained that Snowball's treachery was exposed in secret documents, probably called the Snow Dossier. Boxer relinquishes his suspicion because Napoleon is always right. Only 4 days later, Napoleon holds a meeting and uses his secret police to extract public confessions from 4 young pigs that had been his critics since the expulsion of Snowball. The pigs are forced to admit they were in league with Snowball. They were summarily executed. Napoleon demanded if anyone else had anything to confess. The 3 hens that had rebelled at Napoleon's egg contract confessed that Snowball had compelled them to disobey Napoleon's order. They were summarily executed. A goose confessed to stealing 6 ears of corn. It was summarily executed. A sheep confessed to urinating in the drinking pool because Snowball told her to do so. She is summarily executed. 2 other sheep confessed to murdering an old ram. They are summarily executed. Times were bloody on Animal Farm. The animals split. The dogs and pigs stay put. The rest of the animals return to gather around the half-finished windmill. Boxer declares that the flaw is within themselves and vows to work harder. The rest of the animals gather around Clover. In their misery, they sing Beasts of England, slowly and tunefully, as it had never been sung before. Squealer approaches and explains that Napoleon has banned Beasts of England and it was not needed anymore. It was to be replaced by a short song written by the pig Minimus. Animal Farm, never through me shall thou come to harm. Times were troubled on Animal Farm. A few days after the executions, Clover asks Muriel to read her the 6th commandment. There on the side of the barn, no animal shall kill any other animal without cause. Napoleon continues to withdraw from the rest of the animals and even from the other pigs by confining most of his activity to a subset of the farmhouse rooms. Napoleon declares that the former Farmer Jones's gun should be fired not only to commemorate the Revolution on Midsummer's Eve and to remember the Battle of Cowshed, but also on his birthday. Minimus composes a poem in tribute to Napoleon, and its words are painted on the barn opposite the 10 Commandments. A painting of Napoleon is added by Squealer. In the middle of the summer, 3 hens come forward and confess to being inspired by Snowball to assassinate Napoleon. They are executed. Napoleon employs a food tester named Pink Eye. Napoleon continues to become more and more chummy with Pinchfield and Foxwood, all the while continuing to gaslight the farm animals about the neighboring farms, their owners, and the state of the animals on those farms. By autumn, On time, despite the setback and troubles, despite the hardships, despite Snowball's treachery, the windmill was finished. The machinery was still to be installed, but the structure was done. The animals marveled at their achievement. Napoleon himself came out to look at it. He immediately named it Napoleon Mill. Times were looking up on Animal Farm. The machinery for the mill would be paid for by the sale of a pile of timber Animal Farm had, but did not need. The political machinations and gaslighting about the sale of the pile of wood had Napoleon pitting Pinchfield against Foxwood. The end result was that Napoleon sold the wood to Frederick of Pinchfield and explained that the stories of Snowball working at Pinchfield had been a lie concocted by Snowball, and the recently adopted "Death to Frederick" motto should be replaced with "Death to Pilkington." Now, as an aside to bring this point closer to home, this pile of wood story was something I had not been talking about, mostly because it does little to move the story forward, but at this point it seemed relevant, and now that I wanted to talk about it, I was completely lost. I had to literally draw a picture and go back through the book to remember which farm was which farmer was which, and how the narrative about who was evil and who wasn't had been constantly shifting. This is the biggest problem with propaganda and gaslighting. It has nothing to do with the truth. It has everything to do with an outcome. The messaging and truth are just tools to affect the outcome. Farmer Frederick wants to pay for the wood with a check. This sounded like a scam to Napoleon, so Napoleon demanded payment in 5-pound notes. In advance, of course, because you can't trust humans. So Frederick delivers the notes and quickly hauls away the lumber. Of course, the notes are forgeries. Napoleon goes ballistic and reinstates the gaslighting that has previously been waved away as a creation of Snowball and begins sending conciliatory messages via pigeon to Foxwood. Farmer Frederick wastes no time and on the following morning attacks Animal Farm with 15 men and 6 guns. The attack is easily successful despite the animals fighting valiantly. The animals retreat to the buildings and Farmer Frederick's men let them. Blasting powder makes short work of the windmill. It is reduced to far-flung rubble and even the foundation is damaged. This enrages the animals, and they attack en masse and do not heed the stinging pellets. The animals manage to drive the men from the farm. Most of the animals were wounded. A cow, 3 sheep, and 2 geese are killed. A 2-day celebration ensues to mark their great victory. Napoleon creates an Order of the Green Banner and bestows it on himself. The gun is fired many times. Speeches are made. The unfortunate banknote affair is forgotten. Times were patriotic on Animal Farm. A few days after the Battle of the Windmill, the pigs find a cask of whiskey in the farmhouse and get hammered. Many songs, including Beasts of England, are heard coming from the farmhouse. The next day, a bleary-eyed squealer sadly announces that Napoleon is dying. By noon, Napoleon declares that the drinking of alcohol was to be punishable by death. By the next day, Napoleon had miraculously began to recover. A couple days later, Napoleon asks Whymper to purchase some books on making booze. And a week later, Napoleon decides that a plot of land that had been set aside for grazing by members of Animal Farm that were beyond their age of service was to be used instead for barley. Not long after that, a midnight incident involving Squealer, a bucket of paint, and a broken ladder at the foot of the 10 Commandments result in yet another misremembered commandment. Commandment 5 now reads, "No animal shall drink alcohol to excess." In Chapter 9, the descent into tyranny accelerates. The plot of land that was formerly set aside for superannuated animals was given over to the production of barley. Rumors circulate that a portion of the large pasture was to be set aside for retired animals and rations were being set. To date, no animal had actually reached retirement age, but Boxer's time was rapidly approaching and would arrive in the summer of the following year. Boxer redoubles his efforts to complete the windmill before that time arrived, working 7 days a week along with extra hours to gather the required stone. Life was hard. The animals were typically cold and hungry. The dogs and pigs seemed to gain weight. Squealer propagandized about how well the farm was doing and how much better life was now than it was under Farmer Jones. The animals believed him because, frankly, most had forgotten Jones and had lost any memory of what life was like before Animal Farm. Squealer was quick to point out that under Jones, they were slaves. But now the animals were free. Times were relativistic on Animal Farm. The pigs and dogs were increasing in size and population. This caused a strain on the resources of Animal Farm. In late February, a savory smell wafted across the farm and appeared to be emanating from the brew house on the farm. The animals dreamed of a warm mash added to their rations, but instead this smell resulted in beer for the pigs. The serving for Napoleon was served in the Crown Derby soup tureen. The animals noticed an increase in the amount of songs, speeches, and processions. The processions typically involved the green flag of Animal Farm, to which was added the phrase, "Long live Comrade Napoleon." Poems were read in honor of Napoleon, and Squealer would bring forth his numbers, showing how prosperous Animal Farm had become. The festivities would almost make the animals forget their empty stomachs, at least for a time. In April, Animal Farm was declared a republic, which necessitated that a president be elected. There was only one candidate, Napoleon, elected unanimously. More documents were discovered showing that Snowball fought openly on the side of the humans at the Battle of Cowshed, and the wounds suffered by Snowball had been inflicted by Napoleon. In the summer, Moses suddenly showed up after being absent for years. He would speak about Sugar Candy Mountain.
Oh, they took my freaking kidney.
The pigs would declare his stories lies, but allowed Moses to stay on the farm and even gave him a daily ration of beer. Religion had returned to Animal Farm. It was decided that a schoolhouse must be built for the young pigs, who, as mentioned before, were increasing in numbers. So the animals had to rebuild the windmill, build a schoolhouse, and do their day jobs. The long days took their toll on the animals. Even Boxer began to wane. As he approached his 12th birthday, he worked harder to gather enough stone for the windmill to be built. Finally, in late summer, Boxer collapses and is unable to get up. A thin trickle of blood is coming from his mouth. Half of the animals rush to Boxer's side. Upon seeing Boxer, they make the foolish decision to tell Squealer. Clover and Benjamin stay with Boxer, and the rest of the animals rush to tell Squealer. The pigs are greatly concerned and decide that Boxer must be sent to a doctor. The doctor that arrives has the words Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler, Willingdon, dealer in hides and bone mill, on the side of his van. Boxer is never seen again. Squealer recounts the dramatic last moments he shared with Boxer at his side. A banquet is held in Boxer's honor, to which a cask of whiskey is delivered, consumed by the pigs and paid for with the funds that suddenly made themselves available. Times were confusing on Animal Farm. Years pass. The only animals that were old enough to recall a time before the rebellion were Clover, Benjamin, Moses, and some of the pigs. Jones had passed away. Snowball is forgotten. Boxer is forgotten, other than the few alive who knew him. Clover was 2 years away from retirement, but truth be known, nobody had ever retired on Animal Farm. Animal Farm had expanded by purchasing 2 fields from Pilkington and Foxwood. It was better organized and profitable. The windmill had completed, and the energy had gone to milling corn rather than the electrification of stalls and other promises made towards the betterment of the animals' lives on Animal Farm. Mr. Whymper was thriving and had even purchased a dog cart for himself. Another windmill was being built, but the dynamos that would be installed would not be towards manifesting a 3-day work week. As Napoleon declared, this would be counter to the principles of animalism, hard work, and frugal living. The goalposts never rested on Animal Farm. The prosperity of Animal Farm did not extend beyond dogs and pigs. Only Benjamin knew the truth that life was hunger, hardship, and disappointment. Animal Farm was still the only farm wholly operated by the animals themselves. Major had proclaimed a coming republic of the animals, and the republic had manifested. If the animals of Animal Farm were cold and hungry, it was in service to one another that the hardships were endured. No animal called another animal master. All animals were equal. One day in late summer, Squealer sequesters the sheep to teach them a new song. Weeks later, Clover and some of the old-timers are alarmed by the sight of one of the pigs, Squealer, walking on his hind legs. He was soon joined by a long file of other pigs from the farmhouse, all walking on their hind legs. Finally, Napoleon joined the procession, and the animals of Animal Farm noticed a whip held in his trotter. Years of conditioning of the animals to not object and not complain had reached a breaking point, but at that moment the sheep erupt in their newly learned refrain, 4 legs good, 2 legs better. Clover and Benjamin go to the barn to read the 7 commandments. However, there were no longer 7 commandments, but 1 commandment remained. That commandment read, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. The pigs began supervising the farm work with whips. They began wearing clothes. They had a phone installed and took subscriptions to various publications. Times seemed to be vaguely familiar on Animal Farm. A week later, a contingent of neighboring farmers, humans, arrived and toured Animal Farm. They dined with the pigs of Animal Farm, toasted one another, swept aside suspicions, differences, and luxuriated in their privileged class above the lesser residents of Animal Farm. Napoleon declares that the animals will no longer call one another comrade, and that the farm would go by its true name, Manor Farm. The strange custom of the animals of Animal Farm filing past a boar skull would be abolished and the boar skull buried. The closing scene sees the animals peering in on a squabble that results when Napoleon and Mr. Pilkington both played the ace of spades in the same game of cards. The animals could not tell who was pig and who was man. Times were good on Manor Farm. So what's the dude perspective on Animal Farm by George Orwell? Well, I ask you, dear viewer, do you take any solace in the idea that the pigs didn't intend for things to turn out this way? Do you take comfort in the thought that Animal Farm started with the best of intentions? Does it matter in the slightest what Major hoped would happen? Further questions. Had Benjamin seen this all before? One of the key lessons of Animal Farm is that the difference between oppressor and oppressed is never so simple. The tendency of power is that it will corrupt. You'll notice that the early transgressions were bounded by the 7 commandments. Then the 7 commandments were flexed to allow for certain transgressions. Finally, the 7 commandments were replaced by one that had nothing to do with the original 7. Notice that the pigs and the animals were both patient, but only in the case of the pigs did the patience pay off. And the main distinguishing factor was the animals assumed they were aligned with the pigs. The pigs never bothered if they were aligned with the animals. And I suppose it should not surprise us, dude, that if there is a lack of alignment, there's going to be a lack of satisfaction with the results. So there you go, the dude perspective on Animal Farm by George Orwell. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. You know the drill. Comment, always comment. Engage with the content because this is life, if I recall correctly.